And you're very welcome to the RTÉ Rugby podcast ahead of the opening weekend of the Six Nations Championship. Delighted to say we have Bernard Jackman, Donal Lenihan and Wes Liddy with me for the next hour or so. You're all very welcome, gentlemen. I suppose this time of year, Donal, we all should be getting very excited about the Six Nations Championship. There's no crowds, as we know, this year, but nonetheless, I presume you're looking forward to the championship.
You know, sport has been fantastic. We had, the GA kept us going during the autumn. But look, Six Nations is always special. I always loved the Six Nations. Come back to Five Nations. I can go back to watching it as a young boy in black and white on the television when the grainy pictures were coming in from Cardiff. So it's just a special competition, and I think it's interesting when you listen to a lot of the Southern Hemisphere players who they played for New Zealand or Australia, South Africa. They've seen the Six Nations from a distance, but they don't really get it until such time as they actually come up here and start playing with clubs in be it in England, Ireland or France. And then they go to a Six Nations game and they understand the whole buzz around the thing, the history and the tradition. So it's a special tournament. And, in times like this, I look, you have the lockdown date, 4th of March. Nobody knows what's going to happen. I mean, in my old selfish world, I'm quite busy with the Six Nations coming along, and the last weekend is 20th of March. So I see the Six Nations as a means of getting to the next stage with a lot of entertainment. I'll be lucky enough to be at some of the matches, certainly the Ireland games in the Aviva Stadium. Two cracking games as well, France and England. They won't be like other years, of course, with 50,000 plus supporters. But look, that's what makes it special, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Bernard, I don't know, obviously, as Donal said, he's right. It's something we look forward to every year. But I don't know, is there the usual optimism around the championship this year? Just because from an Irish context, I guess things have been a little bit up in the air, and the pandemic as well. Is there the same enthusiasm, you think, for the rugby this year?
Look, I don't think there's not the same build-up. I mean, ordinarily, when you're out and about, you'll be hearing people talking about when you fly into Cardiff, where are we meeting up, and all that social side that goes with the Six Nations, which is a huge part of it, let's be honest. But I think as we, over the next couple of days, as the teams are announced, and Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon, people will be getting excited listening to it on the radio or watching on TV, and it'll pick up momentum for sure. I think everyone appreciates how lucky we are to have pro sport, and it's not the same level of enthusiasm. Obviously, we're not really sure where we are as a team in Ireland. I think there's not huge levels of optimism, but still, once the tournament starts, I think it'll build momentum, and hopefully for us, it's positive momentum on the back of a really good start against Wales.
What about you, Wes? You don't look forward to anything. Do you look forward to the Six Nations Championship, or how do you feel?
I look forward to hearing from you every week on this podcast too. But other than that, look, I am looking forward to it. I think obviously the no crowds and what Bert said, the cramping of the social component of it's a massive thing, and the weekends away are a huge part of it for the supporters. But equally, I think there's a big opportunity, especially here in Ireland, and that, like, I suppose when the Nations Cup was on in November, the GA championships were in full swing and probably took more of the public attention, whereas there's kind of a clear run at this and something for the whole country to get behind. And I suppose this new management under Andy Farrell, the team hasn't really formed an identity in a lot of ways. We don't know what to expect from them, and you're hoping that they kind of can go out and express themselves and the country kind of rows in behind them over the next couple of months.
What's a reasonable return, Donal, for Ireland and Andy Farrell in this championship, do you think?
Well, you're certainly, you look at Italy, Wales and Scotland, you'll be looking to win those games. You have France and England in Dublin. I think it's unrealistic that, or I can't see Ireland sort of winning a Grand Slam. But like, if you could beat one of those in Dublin, then I think that's a really good championship. I think you want to see evidence that the team is building a style and that you see incremental improvements, let's say, from the autumn. As Hugh has said, it's been a very fractured time since Andy Farrell has come in. He's operating in a totally different environment to what you normally expect in international camp. But it's the same for everybody. And, that's become the norm now, and you have to move on. So Yeah, look, I think it's Ireland. They've been top half of the table for a long time now. I think least best is probably finishing third in the championship, which is, I think, right now where I'd expect them to finish. But even having said that, and I know we'll be going on to talk about the Wales game specifically, it is, I think, a little bit more challenging game next Sunday than a lot of people seem to think.
Yeah, and just on the overall expectation, Bernard, I guess, a couple of seasons ago, we would have been going into this championship fully hoping and expecting maybe to win it. We've had to kind of maybe readjust our expectations, I think, in the last year and a half or so.
Yeah, I do. I think England have really kicked on, and France, after probably a decade of chaotic selection, playing without any real game plan, they seem to be much more switched on and have uncovered a new generation of players who have no fear and are able to bring consistency in an international jersey. So I think the realists would say that on form or in terms of squad depth, England and France are a little bit ahead of us at the moment. And for us to be able to beat them, and we're well capable of beating them, we probably just need to have, real cohesion and implement a game plan or our way of playing at a very high level. And obviously with both of them coming to Dublin, normally that's a great chance to win. But I think the lack of a home crowd, it will be a disadvantage for us when we play the two big teams, England and France, but also an advantage for us in terms of going to Cardiff and Edinburgh, which haven't always been favourite. Well, Cardiff hasn't always been an easy place to go for us. So, we also have a very experienced squad. So, I think 11 of our squad are over 30. So they do know how to perform in big games, and potentially, they will lock in now for the Six Nations and get back to the levels that we know they can play at, and start to create an identity that Wesley spoke about that we're probably just not sure about at the moment.
Yeah, I was going through obviously the fixture list, and I said, right, obviously highlight England and France at home as massive games. But I said to myself, hang on a second here. We go to Wales this weekend and we don't come back with a win. And the pressure on Andy Farrell is absolutely huge after the first weekend.
Yeah, it is. They're nearly, bar the Italy one, they're nearly all kind of games that could potentially go either way. You probably fancy yourself as being a little better than Scotland and Wales, but, it being an away fixture kind of mitigates against that. But we don't really know if a home advantage is going to play any part this season either. And equally, France and England are ahead of us, but with them coming to Dublin, it's certainly not a hopeless cause. So, it's a funny one. You look at the fixture calendar and you look at the talent in the team, and you're kind of thinking, geez, if we get some momentum going, maybe we can at least be in contention towards the latter end of the season. But as you say, the ulterior to that is that you lose one and it can kind of snowball in the opposite direction. And I think there's definitely a few concerns in terms of there's a lot of guys that really aren't up to speed match fitness wise heading into this first weekend. And because of that, I think there's possibly, and with Doris pulling out as well, there's possibly more positions up for grabs than we're used to heading into the start of the Six Nations. But that's not a bad thing. We're talking about teams being picked on form and all that, but there's kind of if you look through the team, Conway, Lowe, Ringrose, Henshaw, Tyke Furlong, obviously, Ian Henderson, there's a lot of guys that haven't played a lot of rugby in what's already a fractured season. So is it realistic to expect us to kind of go from where we were last November without any real preparation time and to be much improved? It's probably unlikely, you'd have to think, if you're to look at it logically.
So there's pressure on Ireland, Donal, going into this. There's pressure on Wales, Wayne Pivac as well. He hasn't had the easiest starts. So you have two coaches with two sets of squads going into this game where really they'll be going hell for leather to try and win just in the opening weekend of the Six Nations Championship.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, we all know what rugby's like in Wales. It's, it's their national game. People live, breathe the sport, and the mood of the nation is set by the performance of the rugby team on a Saturday. Wayne Pivac, I've spoken to Warren Gatland about this in the past, and that sort of the glass bowl that is Welsh rugby. It's brilliant when you're performing, but when you're not, it can be a very lonely place. And I think it's been a difficult place for Wayne Pivac. He came in last year on the back of Wales finishing a semi-finalist in the World Cup. Had a fantastic tournament given the players that they have, and we always knew that Gatland and his combination of coaches were able to get the maximum out of the players they had. I think Pivac came in. We all know he's an excellent coach. He did a brilliant job with the Scarlets, the team that he had that beat Leinster in a final, remember, in a Pro 12, I think it was at the time, played fantastic rugby. But, you know, having this dream that you're able to immediately transfer that style of play into the international arena, it just hasn't worked. The pressure is on big time in Wales. They've only won 3 of the 10 games under Pivac, 2 of those against Wales, 1 against Georgia. So this is a defining game for this Welsh team. I think, you know, there's a lot of emotional energy being used in Wales at the moment. An admission almost by Pivac that he needs to go back to basics a little bit more. And, you know, I think bringing Dan Lydiate back into the squad is a sign of that. I think from the autumn, people like Ken Owens are going to be back in the frame again. He'll make a huge difference, especially to their set piece. And they're back in the Principality Stadium as it is now, which is, even though there's no people there, and, you know, the Welsh probably feed off their fans more than anyone. But with due respects to Parky Scarlets, you know, trying to put on a veil, that's where they play their games in the autumn. It's just not the same as playing in the National Stadium. So I think Wales will play on all these things during the week. And I think you're going to see a physical and an emotional response from Wales that makes them very dangerous, even despite the fact that they won't have their usual 75,000 in the stadium.
So Ireland are going to have to be up for this, Bernard. Like, there's no time to hit the ground, if you like. They have to literally, from the first step here, take the fight to Wales and put in a performance to get over the line and win this match.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with Donal. I think I would expect a backlash from Wales. They got a couple of wins in Italy and Georgia. You know, and the content wasn't probably as pleasing as they would want. But given the results up till then, I think that'll settle them a little bit. Obviously, they made a change in terms of their defence coach. Byron Haywood has left, and you know, they brought in getting Jenkins as a temporary defence coach at the moment, but he's implemented the Sean Edwards. You know, he believes in the Sean Edwards model. The model they were using before that was more of a drift defence, which wasn't really working. They were quite porous defensively. So, and we've always struggled against that. I mean, we're talking about Ireland trying to find an identity. We're hearing about this evolving attacking game. Well, you know, the Sean Edwards type defense is not really the defense that tends to suit us in terms of attacking. So it's going to take a lot of good game management from Murray and Sexton to make sure that we don't give them energy by playing into that hard edge defense. And yeah, and they have a lot of quality players who will want to basically, you know, beat Ireland for sure, get a start at the Six Nations. And I agree with Donal. I think it will be very hard for them, given the high of getting to a World Cup semi-final, given all the problems that are happening in Welsh rugby with pay cuts, with salary banding, with, you know, all that intellectual property of Gatland, Howley, Sean Edwards, Rob McBride leaving the same time, not playing in your home stadium, a little bit of friction in terms of where the team is going. A lot of change at the same time, but I think that players realise now from a personal point of view as well. I mean, this is potentially a lot of lines tests up for grabs or spots in the squad in how they perform, and I could see them really focusing for this Six Nations. And when you look at the quality they have in terms of, you know, like the George North back to form, etc., they are a team who could beat us for sure, you know. And
do you still think they have that capability, Birch, to under Gatland they could always, you know, some of the region's parts outperform that when they came together under the Wales blanket, if you like? Do you still think they're capable of doing that?
Yeah, I think a big part of that was the fact that, and then this sounds maybe stupid, and maybe it's stupid, but I'll tell you the reason behind it. They didn't have to go to the well emotionally as often as Irish players. So when you play for Leinster against Munster, you know, it's a huge game. When you play in the knockout stages of Europe, they're huge games. When you play in the semi-final, final of the Pro 14, they're big games. Whereas the Welsh teams and Welsh players very rarely have had to do that. The Scarlets, you know, when they won the Pro 14, but they're very rarely in the knockout stages of Europe. when they play for their home provinces, regions, you know, there's no crowds. The crowds are tiny. There's not real pressure on. And then suddenly they go into Welsh camp. And for that 6-7 week block, it's absolutely massive. I mean, it's hard to, like, you know, we love our rugby here. But over there, I mean, when Wales are playing, it just unites. Well, it doesn't actually unite them. There's lots of arguments, but they're all passionate about Team Wales. So I think for the squad and the players in it, it's another step up emotionally. And usually, you know, they feed off the crowd as well in terms of, you know, a full Millennium Stadium. But I do expect these players, the biggers, the you know, the Alan Wynnes, the Falataus, the George Norths, the Tippricks, etc., Ken Owens, to, you know, really be able to get that extra 10% out of themselves in this tournament, and that could change the picture massively.
Okay, right. So let's focus on Ireland then this week, if we can. And I guess what Andy Farrell might do. Wes, what kind of a team are you expecting him to put out? We know obviously Doris is gone, so the back row will be different from the last time we saw Ireland. There are options here. You could move Peter O'Mahony to 6. You could bring in, you know, Van der Fleer or Connors at 7 there. You could put CJ Stander back to number 8. You could bring Jack Conan in. What do you see as the most likely option in the back row for Andy Farrell?
I suppose, as Birch was saying last week, possibly the selection of Tadhg Byrne in the second row can answer some of that question as well, in terms of the threat you have over the ball. I suppose Connors and Van der Fleer are kind of more established under Andy Farrell than, say, Rhys Ruddock is. But, you know, moving Peter back to 6 and kind of downsizing again at 7 maybe possibly is, you know, is quite counterintuitive to what they've done so far. So maybe there's an option for Rhys Ruddock to come straight in at 6 potentially. And I think equally the front row is curious in terms of, you know, surely he's not going to go with Tadhg Furlong straight away, but he does have that 40 minutes under his belt now. And, you know, the idea of Porter and Kilcoyne, or Furlong and Kilcoyne, being in reserve is a very strong impact off the bench. But again, as I said earlier, I mean, of those 3 names we just named as props, 2 of them have played, you know, 40 minutes in the last number of months. So there's kind of opportunities and there's risks there at the same time. I think the back line is kind of, until you get to the back 3, kind of picks itself. And Stockdale's injury of fullbacks probably made sure Keenan will start there, and you probably have a decision to make between Larmour and Lowe on one of the wings. But I think second row, back row, and tight head are probably the main conversation points.
Would you start Tadhg Furlong, Donald, given he's only played 40 minutes of rugby?
I've been thinking about this, and I tell you, it's a huge risk no matter what you do, because like logic would dictate that given Tadhg has only played 40 minutes, I think, since 23rd of February last year, you'd say you can't start him. So you put him on the bench, you start Andrew Porter. But I'll give you the scenario then. What happens? Porter gets injured after 5 minutes. Furlong now has to come on and play 75 minutes. And, you know, that's not beyond the realms of possibility. I think it actually happened the other way around against Wales, was it 2 or 3 years ago, when Furlong went off after 5 minutes and Porter came on. So in the ideal scenario, as I say, you'd be keeping Furlong in reserve, start Porter, and bring Tadhg on for the last 20-25 minutes. But as I say, the risk with that is if Porter gets injured. So it's always a conundrum when you're picking a bench. You look at all the what if scenarios, and no matter what, you know, most of the time, and now with 8 subs, you should be well covered in every position. But the difficulty is when you have a number of players, as Ireland have at the moment, who don't have huge game time under their belt, then you do leave yourself slightly vulnerable. So as I say, ideally I'd start Porter, hope he doesn't get injured in the opening half, and keep Furlong in reserve. Otherwise I think it's a huge ask.
Do you think Rhys Ruddock will come straight into the back row, given he's played so well for Leinster, and there is a bit of a clamour for him to see game time this championship?
Yeah, there is, but you've got to look at it from the point of view of Andy Farrell. He didn't include Ruddock in the November series. So does he go from being outside of the 35 or the 40 to leapfrog everyone straight into the team? You know, I'm a massive fan of Rhys Ruddock, always have been. He's never left Ireland down. I remember him coming in the morning of a South Africa game a number of years ago, and he actually played 7, and he had an outstanding game. So he has that in his armoury. But I think, firstly, I think the loss of Caelan Doris is absolutely huge. He's different to the other back rows in that he has this unbelievable ability of, you know, great power in the tackle. He always gets over the gain line. He has the capacity as well. He's brilliant hands to play as a second receiver. He just, like you heard Paul O'Connell talking about him yesterday, he has X factor for a forward. You don't often hear that, but I think O'Connell is right. So Doris, that is a huge blow. So therefore now you're going to look at your back row. And I think they had come into this campaign with the idea of Peter O'Mahony playing 7, where he's played brilliantly for both Ireland and Munster over the past number of months. So I believe in him there. I think you will then put Stander at 8, so you have a choice to make it 6. Funny enough, I was just looking at some of the clips from training yesterday, and it looked as if Ian Henderson seemed to be involved in the line-out setup. Now, I know they'd be changing players in and out. Ireland were, I think, involved in a control game against Ulster earlier on in the week. So if Henderson is match fit, you then have the option of picking him in the second row and putting Byrne on the blind side. So that covers the physicality. You're bringing more physical presence, if you like, in. And bear in mind that Wales may go back to the past and start with a back row of Lydia, Faletau, who's way fitter now than he was in the November series, and Tipperick at 7. So, you know, it's unfortunately the modern game, it's a power game. It's all about physicality. So I think they're the options that they'll look at.
Okay.
Certainly, they're the ones that I would look at coming in. But all these things, and Birch would appreciate this, a lot of those selections come down, those 50-50 calls, and it'll be the same in the back 3, particularly for one of the wing spots, and we can talk about that later. How are fellas performing in training? Who is showing the spark? And, you know, that, so therefore it's difficult from the outside when you're talking about those marginal calls, because a lot of that is, you actually wait until you see how fellas are training and what's happened during the day in your sessions before you make up your mind fully.
And presumably, Birch, Paul O'Connell has a big role to play in advising Andy Farrell about the starting makeup of the pack. What do you think he's been doing with the squad over the last couple of weeks? And do you think he can fix the problems that we saw, set piece in particular, in the short amount of time that he's had?
Well, if Paul has the same selection, it's not hard it's hard to believe he wouldn't be looking for Ty Byrne at 6, and Henderson and James Ryan with Peter O'Mahony at 7. That'd be a phenomenal attacking line-out. And also defensive line out, and that's obviously one of the areas that Paul is going to be measured. So that's always the case. I mean, no more than John Fogarty will be pushing for the best scrummage and props, and Simon needs to be pushing for the best defensive players. And it's up to Farrell to listen to all the different cases that are being made and try and pick the best combination. But look, there'll be huge focus on our line out, our line out calling. I heard Ian Henderson say in a podcast a couple of weeks ago that Paul was ringing them 2 or 3 times a week, you know, sending them clips, just getting them ready for going into camp. But I'm sure he was doing the same to, you know, with the other locks as well. And that's probably something we've lacked a little bit, is just a real understanding of where the opportunities are, where the space is, and trying to predict what the defense are going to do. So I think there'll be a big focus on that. Our line-out maul, you know, I was critical of some of our decision making in the Autumn Cup, where, you know, we just seemed to kick to the corner out of habit without having shown real sophistication or strength in our line-out maul, which had been a big strength for Ireland. So and Paul is very detailed on that. So, you know, we may be able to take advantage of kicking to the corner and being able to score from it in the Six Nations. That's massive, where there's very little between teams. But and also the breakdown. I mean, he's in charge of the breakdown now, and by all accounts, he's a disciple of the Joe Schmidt philosophy at the breakdown, which, you know, did give us quality ball and made us very hard to get the ball back off, and that hasn't been the case in the last in the last year and a half. And to be honest, probably Joe's last year as well, we weren't as accurate there as we would like. So probably his ability to influence our performance there could have a huge impact on our attack as well. So, and look, it's not going to be fixed overnight, but I think that we will see a real focus in those areas, and hopefully, it pays off and we see some gains.
Well, let's listen to the man himself, Paul O'Connell, new Ireland forwards coach. Of course, he's been chatting to our colleagues Michael Corcoran and Jackie Hurley. First up, Michael asked him about coming into the national team itself and how that all came about.
Yeah, well, look, I'd be in contact with Andy. I was in the camp last year. I'd be in contact with Simon and a few of the other coaches as well. So Andy asked me after the Autumn Nations would I be interested in getting involved. I took a few weeks to think about it and decided it was the right thing for me to do. I feel I can offer value. I have an awful lot to learn, certainly as a coach, but I felt I could immediately offer value to the coaching staff and to the players. And it's a great opportunity. I think international coaching it's very different. You get that development opportunity, you get a chance to reflect, you get a chance to improve during the times where you're not coaching and you're not stuck in a tournament. But when you're in the middle of a tournament, it's full on. So yeah, I suppose the big reason is I felt I could offer value. I suppose my recent connection to playing is you could say it's a weakness, but I think it's a bit of a strength as well. You're still clued into what a player feels and how a player learns and how hard it can be to learn at times and to change a habit. So that was it. I mean, I was excited the minute he rang me, and I think he's got a really good environment here. The players enjoy it incredibly. They're very, I suppose, a very collaborative approach, which I would have seen when I was in with them last year and whenever I speak to the players, whenever I've met them. So it was a great environment to enjoy, to join, and the opportunity excited me.
I would imagine, from your point of view, it's a very much a hands-on role. I mean, I saw some of the footage of the game that they had against Ulster. You had to whistle one hand, hat in your head to stay warm. It looked as if you were very much kind of involved in the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's very collaborative. It's amazing how much coaching the players actually do themselves, how educated they are on what's happening, on opposition, on what's happening in the world of rugby, what we need to do and how we have to deliver it. So that's very enjoyable for me, but it's also a challenge for me. You want to be in there running the whole show, but Andy has us questioning the players, checking for understanding all the time. And, when players understand something, they have a better chance of delivering it physically. And that's something he's big into. But, yeah, I suppose, look, forwards coaching and the way Andy does things, everyone is hands-on. So you have to be in the middle of it.
One of the questions, Paul, that I would have had is obviously you've been in there before, but obviously coming back in a formal role, how different is it, and are there difficulties in coaching lads who you would have played with? Because obviously there's still plenty of them around.
I would hope not. I'm sure there will be challenges down the line when you have to have difficult conversations with people, but Andy's said over and over again, players just want you to be honest with them, and if you're wrong, hold your hand up, and that's what I intend to do. I don't intend to take a big coach-player relationship with them. I intend to deliver them as much honest feedback as I can. I intend to try and improve them as players as much as I can, and I have to be myself in delivering that, and not try to be something else to them. Some of these guys I've known for a long time. Some of these guys are good friends of mine, but I just have to be honest with them, straight up with them, positively constructive with them, and that should maintain the relationship.
The other question, Paul, is around the environment. You mentioned it there and just how it's evolved. What are the differences that you see between how Andy is running things versus how Joe would have run things when you were in there?
Well, I suppose we're in the HPC now, and that has actually made a big change to it, because you've pitch side televisions in the indoor pitch here. You've TVs in the gym, So you're able to have these mini meetings, these short meetings where you go from a meeting to a little bit of technical work, back to a meeting to a little bit of technical work. So there was going to be a natural change anyway from when Joe finished to when Andy took over. I suppose, you know, when we had meetings with Joe, he loved the meeting. You know, he was box office when he delivered. And he was always trying to keep everything under 30 minutes. So there wasn't a lot of questions. But I always enjoyed then debating things after the meeting with him. And I never felt like I couldn't question him or argue with him. And I loved his environment. And it's probably just similar here. It's probably shorter meetings because there's more time for questioning. And in fairness, the question that Tom O'Toole asks in a meeting today, and the answer he gets is probably a question that 7 or 8 people should be asking as well. So it's probably good that we have those discussions and debates, and that's the way players learn now. You know, it isn't about long meetings. You know, it's short, sharp meetings. They watch things on their phone. You know, you can send them things on their phone. That wasn't there towards the end of my time when I retired. It was, you know, we were into a meeting, we were into the group, we had a meeting, it was generally a half an hour long, and then the questioning would happen afterwards over dinner, over lunch, or whatever that was. So it's different here, and it's more, look, I think the Crusaders have been very good at it from when you chat to Rod. It's collaborative, trying to get players to coach, trying to get them to own what they're doing. You know, if someone can coach something, explain it really well to someone else, they know what they're doing. And it's a great way to check for their learning and their understanding.
So that's Paul O'Connell there. I mean, this could be a masterstroke by Andy Farrell, Wes. I mean, if Paul O'Connell fixes the line out, if the breakdown is sorted out and we've, you know, quicker ruck ball on our side and equally protected it when we do have it, it could be a masterstroke.
Could be something else either. You know, like, what do we know about Paul O'Connell? As a coach, not a lot. He had a few months spell with Stade Francais. He had a little bit of time with the Irish under-20s. What do we know about him as a person? We know he's huge work ethic. We know he's intelligent. We know he's an inspirational character from his playing days. And so the portents are obviously all good that he has the requisite skills, but you know, there's still an element of hope in that. And equally, a cynic could probably point to the fact that it was a very high-profile appointment at a time when people were under pressure, and you know, it didn't hurt in a PR sense either to wheel out a name like that. So that stick is going to be there waiting to beat people with in the case that things don't go as well as we'd like as well. I was just interested in what Bert said there when he said that, you know, Paul would be fighting for the best line-out forward, Simon for the best defensive players, etc. And I suppose I was just curious, does that actually happen a lot? And does it happen because that's the prism those guys see the game through, or is it actually a selfish thing that they want the stats in their particular area to be as good as possible?
No, I think, yeah, obviously, if you have a selection meeting, which they will have, and there's not just those coaches involved, there's potentially medics involved or S&C, particularly with someone coming back from injury like Tyke Furlong, they'll want that opinion on what are the risks. But yeah, I think you have to put and it's not totally selfish around, I want to have 100% line-out stats. It's basically being able to say, look at, you know, there's going to be a lot of kicks to touch, because Wales kick it out. We're going to have a lot of line-out opportunities in the attacking half. It's more important this week we go with a stronger line-out selection. Likewise, you know, Wales are going to have the conundrum around, you know, Jake Ball starting or off the bench with Adam Beard, and you know, John Humphreys, who's the forwards coach, will have to give his opinion, and Wayne Payback will have to, you know, decide where he goes. But I think those conversations held on a Sunday night are invaluable. You know, invaluable for everybody in the coaching staff to understand everyone else's point of view and to try and come up with the best possible compromise. And there's always an element of compromise. But yeah, I think with Andy Farrell, particularly his character, those conversations, like, I think he's not a dictator, and I think he will lean on his support staff to come up with selection. Whereas, you know, there's plenty of other coaches who will just basically give the team to the coaches and say, look, go prep them this week, you know. So, but I think in Ireland for sure, it's definitely a shared responsibility.
Donal, like
sorry, just on the question, Wes, you better believe every individual coach is fighting for his man in there. I mean, I've seen this firsthand over the years. I remember
on what basis are they fighting though? Is it as simple as Paul going, well, I want my line out to be 100%, and I'm going to actually put forward someone, even if he's not the best for the team overall, because he's the best for me?
Well, everybody is conscious of their own area of responsibility. As I say, I remember being in a Lions context. Phil Larder was the defence coach, and like I'm going back now when the rugby league influence was just starting in terms of that organised defence, and certainly England would have been 2 or 3 years ahead of, say, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. I'm going back to the early 2000s here now, but I used to. Every selection meeting, every player who was knocked was the fellow who missed a marginal tackle in training, or everything was based for him on who was the best defender, who could understand his system best, not who was the best player in the overall context or in an attacking context. I remember an early discussion on the Lions tour surrounding Brian O'Driscoll, and Larder had, because Brian would have been a very young player, 21 years of age, not a huge amount of experience, wouldn't have been exposed to a defensive coach. And Larder was, up in arms behind the scenes, like, is this fella good enough to be in the team? So, like, it's something you've got to be conscious of, especially when a team is under pressure. It's fine when teams are doing well and the overall package is brilliant. But when the heat comes on, you do tend to find in some scenarios where coaches, of course, they're going to try and do what's best, but they're always conscious in the background that their head is on the block as well. So, I mean, look, at the flip side of that, there's no point in having Paul O'Connell and his expertise. And bear in mind, by his own admission, Paul is a nerd of the game in terms of he loves watching games and he sees things. So you'd be absolutely foolish to bring him in and not listen to what he has to say in terms of the combinations that he is looking for and the rationale behind, as Bert says, those conversations that you have at the start of a week when you're building up towards the game, the international the following Saturday, and you have a certain logic in your head, but you've got to listen to the rationale of the coaches and why they might be pushing for one fellow over another. And they are the type of things that you're looking for then in training during the week, who adapts best. So yeah, I mean, but you welcome that dialogue. The worst case, and who knows, like, is this what happened in the end in the Joe Schmidt scenario? Was there enough dialogue from other coaches, or was there sufficient input from coaches to have an influence overall? Who knows? But getting that balance right is huge.
Right, we'll move on, lads. I want to talk a little bit about England-Scotland this weekend. I think, and maybe I'm going to sound absolutely stupid next week when I say this, I think Scotland don't have a good chance of upsetting the apple cart against England this weekend. And I say that because, if you look at the last couple of games, they got a victory against the French. They managed to beat Wales. They are definitely on an upward curve. They have some very exciting players when it all comes together. And I wonder if they could just put in a performance to catch England cold this weekend.
Yeah, all those possibilities are there. We've been sort of talking about Scotland, waiting for Scotland to sort of burst out of the blocks. They seem to have a stronger squad every year. You go back to the Ireland-Scotland game, you might remember Eddie O'Sullivan had a rant in the panel at the end of it, Scotland, and he was right in many respects in terms of Scotland. They talked themselves up so much, but yet they failed to deliver. And I think we're in this space again. I saw an interview there, Rory Sutherland, the Scotland loose head, when he was talking about England. McElvanapola is out, and Sinclair is out, and Marner is out, and our scrum has been brilliant, and Peter de Villiers is our scrum coach, and we're going to take him on. Birch, you can imagine Eddie Jones sitting listening to this crap and saying, right, lads, Scotland are coming down here and they're going to push you all over the pitch. Like, Scotland have to learn that, talking about the game in the build-up and the pre-match is one thing. You've got to perform when the chips are down. And you have to say, go back to the World Cup, that opening game against Ireland, all the talk was Scotland, they had arrived, Ireland blew them away. Japan, I know Japan beat Ireland in the World Cup, but they beat Scotland in that crucial last pool game as well. They just flattered to deceive on so many occasions. They haven't won in Twickenham since 1983. So on the law of logic, they're going to win there soon. And they have the players. And like Cameron Redpath declaring for Scotland over England is a significant one for me. But I think England are compromised. There's no doubt about that, with all the injuries they have. But I'd give Scotland a chance, but I'd expect England to win.
Yeah, and if Finn Russell's on form, I guess that's their best hope to unlock in that English defence. Birch, they don't do themselves any favours, as Donal mentioned. Stuart Hogg annually comes out and says we're in this to win it. I think he did it before the World Cup as well, before they went home packing. But if they can put it together, they have a very exciting team.
Yeah, they have. But the worry for me is how they flopped against Ireland in November on the back of some really good form, and they had probably closed their game in terms of their ambition, but I thought it was more suited to international rugby, and Ireland blew them away. To be honest, they were so poor that day. I just think when it comes to the crunch, yeah, they're capable of the once off, but I just don't see that level of consistency yet. And have maverick players. Finn Russell, is obviously gifted. They've found some forwards with a bit more of an edge. Tandy's improved their defence, but yeah, look, England would have to be very cold, I think, to get caught. Sure, it's possible, but England would have to be a little bit off. If England play to their level, and look, you could question England's form. The last game against France, they were lucky to win it in the Autumn Cup. But I don't know. I always get the impression at the moment that England just seem to be doing enough and they're capable of raising their game a little bit more. So I would be shocked if Scotland won, but for sure it's possible.
Would you give them a chance, Wes?
Give them a chance, yeah. I think England might get caught somewhere, all right.
Maybe against Scotland this weekend. Okay, lads, France as well, before we leave it as well, I want to mention them. Obviously, they're on an upward trajectory, Donal. I mean, they're huge improvements over the last couple of years. They're building towards the next World Cup where they'll be on their home patch. They have a really good coaching ticket. They're missing Vakatawa, which is big. They're missing Entimac, which is also big. But, this is the time to test out the strength and depth in their squad.
Yeah, it is. And that's where I think that autumn series will actually have come in as a huge benefit now. We know at the time there was a lot of eyebrows raised at the fact that Galtier, they made this arrangement with the LNR, the league in France, whereby no player was going to play more than 2 matches. So as a consequence of that, they had a second stroke third team played against England in that final of the Nations Cup, and they brought them to extra time, a dubious penalty at the end, won it for England. So I think France, the big thing, that they're bringing through a different type of athlete. They're bringing through those younger players who not only have had success in Junior World Cups, but I think have bought in more to the science of the modern game in terms of strength and conditioning, nutrition. Obviously, they've bought into what Sean Edwards has brought to the table in terms of structured and organised defence. Entimac is a loss, but Jalabert, you must remember, Jalabert was brought in as a 19-year-old, played against Ireland in the game in Paris 2 years ago now. So he's been on the scene for a long time. He's still only 21 or 22. So I think he has the capacity to make up for the loss of Entimac in the short term. The big one really is Vakatawa. I don't think they have another player of his excitement and capability. It'd be interesting to see their selection. They picked Arthur Vincent to cover, I think, for him in one of the autumn games. He, again, I think, captained France in one of those under-20 World Cups. He's more steady. He doesn't have that kind of ability to break tackles and offload that Vakatawa have. But you look at the skill and the power they have on the wings, particularly Damien Penaud is back. He was out injured for a long time, and he was outstanding. I mean, you put him in a back three with Teddy Thomas and Dulan at full back, and you've all kinds of exciting possibilities. Had Vakatawa been in the middle of all of that, you'd say, oh my God, these fellas could be absolutely brilliant to watch. But I think They have the capacity to cope with the losses of those players, but there is more expectation on them now as well. And they do have 3 away matches in the championship. So, yeah, look, they're up there for me. It's a toss of a coin for me between England and France as to who'll win the championship. So, but I'm looking forward to seeing how they're going to, can they continue to develop firstly? And I'm going to see them, luckily, in the flesh, doing the game in the Aviva on is it a Sunday week. So really looking forward to seeing them and just how good these guys are.
A nice handy start as well when they put 60 points past Italy at the weekend. Okay, the Lions to Australia, Bernard Jackman. A good idea, yes or no?
I'm sceptical of it, to be honest, but it seems that they're doing everything in their power to get it played this summer. The South Africans don't seem to be that keen on the option of going to Australia. I don't see it happening, to be honest. Donal is more of an expert on the Lions than me, but I don't see it being played in Australia, to be honest.
Would you like to see it go there rather than have no test series at all this summer?
Well, I'd actually prefer to postpone it a year. I know that's very complicated, but I'd love to see it played in South Africa in front of fans. And even if we have to wait a while, I prefer to see that than it going ahead in Australia, to be honest.
Donal, I know Australia Rugby Union have said, look, we'll host it for you. We only want to cover our costs. Everything else is up to you, which is quite a generous offer, really, when you consider Australian rugby is not in the most healthy financial place of all time. Do you think it's a good idea, and do you think it's a feasible idea?
Well, I think you talk about a generous offer. The Aussies won't do anything that's not of a benefit to themselves. I think there's a couple of the cynic in me says, look, they're looking to host the 2027 World Cup. They see this as a major way of winning votes from other unions. I think when you get down to the nitty gritty and the bottom line, with all the colour and the pageantry and all that about the Lions, it's the financial aspect and the money making aspect that keeps the game in the Southern Hemisphere going. By going to Australia, I think you've massive logistical issues. You couldn't make the same amount of money out of it because you have to factor in the cost of hosting it and bringing teams to Australia. There was a suggestion of bringing the provincial teams from South Africa down there as well. Look, I just don't see it happening. The ideal scenario is the tour is postponed for a year. You go down there with full crowds next year. But again, I don't see that happening because the individual unions over here, they'll be prioritising their tours. So look, it's a mess, really. A decision has to be made soon, but I don't see that Australian offer as an option, to be honest.
Yeah, it does look increasingly like you, Wes. Like, if it doesn't happen this year, it might not happen at all. And that's just the reality.
I agree with the two lads that the logistics are a huge problem, but to be honest, I'd much rather see it played in front of 40,000 fans in Australia than in front of 0 fans in South Africa if they were the two choices. There is a huge expat population from the 5 countries involved in Australia. I don't think playing the test series is that problematic. I think the idea of flying in provincial teams is ridiculous, and with a 2-week quarantine before you even play a game, it's just not practical. That could happen, but I don't know. I mean, we haven't seen any rugby except down south with crowds in a long time, and a 3-test series on neutral ground with a full house. I mean, I'd watch it.
Oh, we'd all watch it. The South Africans have actually suggested that they swap, that the Australians take this one and they'll take 2025. But that would be so lucrative to Australia in 2025. I can't see them accepting that. I mean, what do you think, Don?
Yeah, no. Again, money will come into it there. And I think to be a great pity because we know South Africa, they are the world champions. You could just see, I mean, we spoke about that, the internal video and how good it was there from the World Cup. You could just see Erasmus and the whole South African team coming together with the Lions coming in and what the Lions would mean going down there. I just don't think to be the same having it out in Australia. Plus the fact that no supporters from Britain or Ireland could go. There's only people who are out in Australia. It's not as if...
well, you could go if you were prepared to quarantine for 2 weeks.
Well, geez, we'd all be prepared to do that, I think. But I'm not so sure. The Aussies, I can't see them leaving in 30,000 visitors. I mean, they had one security guard in Perth got got COVID last week, and they closed down the place for 5 days, which is incredible when you think about it. One person, So you're talking about allowing 30,000 people to come in? Not a chance. Even with 2 months quarantine.
Just finally then, Birch, Leone Nakarawa, we haven't spoken about him since he's joined Ulster. Is it a good signing for Dan, do you think? And at 32 years of age, he obviously still has a bit to offer, but is he the kind of signing that could just, I guess, invigorate the squad?
Yeah, he's a world-class player, obviously come back from injury, so there's a bit of a risk on that point of view, but he's a game changer. It's a great replacement for Coetzee, and obviously Coetzee could only play 8 or 6, whereas Leone can play second row as well, and I'm
fullback.
Fullback. He's one of the best offloaders in the game, and it's a case of man managing him and probably giving him a little bit of more freedom than you would give your normal pro, because they are different, and I think he trains like Jane, but he plays like Tarzan, and that's better. That's better than the other way around. So no, I think he's an exciting addition, and looking for good boost for Pro 14 and good boost for Ulster.
I was the opposite. I used to train like Tarzan and play like Jane.
No, you did everything like Jane.
What did you say?
Sorry, going back to Nakarawa. I mean, there isn't it like he is a top, like at his peak of his powers. Now he's been injured. He's really hasn't featured in the last 12 months. But at the peak of his powers as an international quality second row, he was able to play in a sevens team and win a gold medal in the Olympics in sevens in Rio. I mean, just think, there's no other second row in the world could make a Fiji, would make a sevens team and be good enough to win a gold medal. The guy is a freak of nature. I was reading something Ron O'Gara was talking about him in training, where they just had to leave him off. You just couldn't put any shackles on this guy. And they learned in time, and this is the key. It's like when Christian Cullen came to Munster and he'd make breaks and, the other people weren't reading what was happening around him. You only get the best out of Nakarawa when the players around him understand what he's capable of and get into positions to support him and to be able to play off the offloading game that he has. Now, Dan McFarland had been involved in Scottish rugby for a long time and would have seen Nakarawa from his time there with Glasgow. So he knows what he's getting. I think I agree with Birch. It's brilliant for the league, brilliant for Ulster, and I think he could transform the way they play. So, great signing.
Super. Okay. All right, lads. We're just about done. Anybody think that Ireland won't win this weekend, or are we all confident enough we'll just about get the job done? No negatives? Okay. No. All right. Silence is golden. Okay, great. Well, look, hopefully we'll be talking after one victory this time next week as the Six Nations kicks into action this weekend. My thanks to Donal, to Bernard and to Wes, and for you for listening as well. Enjoy the weekend.